In a cluttered basement office in Washington, D.C. in 1943, surrounded by stacks of newspapers, intercepted radio transcripts, and intelligence reports from around the globe, a mild-mannered geography professor named Harold Gleason was quietly revolutionizing the way America fought the Second World War. Gleason had never worn a military uniform, never fired a shot in anger, never even seen a battlefield. But the maps he created in that cramped basement would influence every major Allied operation, from D-Day to the final assault on Berlin. What made his work so extraordinary wasn't just his mastery of cartography and geographic analysis, but his revolutionary understanding that in modern warfare, accurate intelligence about terrain, weather, and local conditions could be more valuable than additional divisions of soldiers. Gleason had spent his pre-war career as a professor at a small college in Ohio, teaching geography to students who often wondered why they needed to memorize the locations of obscure rivers and mountain ranges. He was the kind of scholar who found genuine excitement in topographic details that others considered tediously academic. A man who could spend hours analyzing the subtle variations in elevation that might affect military operations, or the seasonal weather patterns that could determine the success or failure of an amphibious landing. When Pearl Harbor thrust America into the global conflict, military planners realized that they desperately needed people who understood the geographic realities of fighting, a war across multiple continents and climates. The challenge facing American military leaders in 1943 was unprecedented in scope. Unlike previous conflicts, which had been fought primarily in familiar territories with well-mapped terrain and predictable conditions, World War II required operations in environments that American forces had never encountered. Tropical islands in the Pacific, where coral reefs and tide patterns could doom an invasion. Desert regions in North Africa, where water sources and navigation were matters of life and death. European coastlines defended by obstacles that existed nowhere in American military experience. Traditional military maps, designed for peacetime navigation and general reference, were proving inadequate for the complex planning required by modern combined operations. What commanders needed wasn't just information about where roads and cities were located, but detailed intelligence about beach gradients for amphibious landings, soil conditions that would affect tank operations, seasonal weather patterns that could ground aircraft or disrupt supply operations, and hundreds of other environmental factors that could determine the outcome of battles. Gleason's breakthrough was recognizing that geographic intelligence wasn't just about making better maps, but about understanding how environmental factors interacted with military operations in ways that could be predicted and exploited. Working with a small team of geographers, meteorologists, and intelligence analysts, he began creating what he called operational terrain analysis, a comprehensive approach to understanding battlefields that went far beyond traditional cartography. His first major success came with the planning for the invasion of Sicily in 1943. Conventional military wisdom suggested that the best landing beaches were those with the softest sand and the gentlest slopes, making it easier for troops and equipment to get ashore quickly. But Gleason's analysis revealed that these obvious landing sites were also the most heavily defended, and that alternative beaches, while more challenging from an engineering perspective, offered better opportunities for achieving tactical surprise. More importantly, his detailed study of Sicilian weather patterns revealed that the invasion planners were scheduling their operation during a period when strong winds and rough seas were statistically most likely to occur. By presenting this information to military commanders in terms they could understand, the timing of the invasion was adjusted to take advantage of more favorable conditions, potentially saving thousands of lives and ensuring the success of the operation. The human dimension of Gleason's work was as important as its technical accuracy. He understood that military commanders, trained to think in terms of firepower and maneuver, often overlooked environmental factors that could be more decisive than the number of tanks or aircraft available for an operation. So he developed new ways of presenting geographic intelligence that made it immediately relevant to tactical and strategic planning. Instead of traditional maps showing elevation and political boundaries, Gleason created specialized charts that highlighted militarily significant information, beach gradients coded by color to show which areas could support heavy equipment, road networks analyzed for their capacity to handle military traffic, weather data presented in terms of its impact on specific types of military operations. These weren't just maps. They were intelligence tools designed to help commanders make better decisions. His work on the D-Day planning was perhaps his most significant contribution to the war effort. The Normandy invasion required unprecedented coordination between land, sea, and air forces, and success depended on accurate predictions about everything, from tide patterns and beach conditions to inland terrain that would affect the movement of troops once they got ashore. Gleason's team spent months analyzing every aspect of the Normandy coastline, creating detailed intelligence products that addressed questions no one had thought to ask before. One of his most crucial discoveries concerned the coastal defenses that the Germans had constructed along the Atlantic. WWII, conventional intelligence focused on the locations of bunkers and gun emplacements. But Gleason's analysis revealed that the effectiveness of these defenses was heavily dependent on tide conditions and the angle of approach for landing craft. By identifying specific times and locations where natural conditions would minimize the effectiveness of German defensive fire, his work directly influenced the timing and tactics of the invasion. But perhaps his most important insight was recognizing that the Germans themselves were making strategic decisions based on their own analysis of geographic factors. By studying German defensive preparations through the lens of environmental intelligence, Gleason could predict where enemy commanders would expect Allied attacks and where they would position their reserves. This allowed Allied planners to exploit German assumptions about geographic logic, attacking where the enemy least expected based on their own analysis of terrain and conditions. The psychological aspects of Gleason's work extended beyond simple military planning. He understood that soldiers' morale and effectiveness were heavily influenced by their understanding of and adaptation to environmental conditions. Troops who were properly prepared for the climate, terrain, and conditions they would encounter were not only more effective militarily, but also more resilient psychologically when faced with the stresses of combat. So his intelligence products included not just information for commanders, but practical guidance for soldiers and units preparing for operations in unfamiliar environments. His work helped American forces adapt more quickly to fighting in tropical jungles, Arctic conditions, desert warfare, and urban combat, giving them significant advantages over enemies who were often better familiar with local conditions but less systematic in their approach to environmental planning. The impact of Gleason's work was felt across every theater of the war. In the Pacific, his analysis of coral reef patterns and tide conditions helped American amphibious forces achieve surprise and avoid disasters that could have cost thousands of lives. In Europe, his understanding of seasonal weather patterns influenced the timing of major operations, while his detailed terrain analysis helped ground forces exploit natural advantages and avoid environmental obstacles. One of the most remarkable aspects of his contribution was how it changed military thinking about the relationship between geography and strategy. Before Gleason's work, environmental factors were often treated as background conditions that military forces had to adapt to after the fact. His approach demonstrated that geographic intelligence could be a decisive factor in military planning, worthy of the same attention and resources devoted to traditional intelligence. about enemy forces and intentions, the secrecy surrounding. Gleason's work meant that his contributions remained largely unknown for decades after the war. He returned to his academic career, but he carried with him the knowledge that his understanding of geography and environmental analysis had played a crucial role in some of the most important military operations in history. The maps he had created in that basement office in Washington had helped reshape the world. After the war, the techniques and approaches developed by Gleason's team influenced everything from Cold War intelligence operations to modern military planning. The idea that environmental intelligence deserved the same priority as traditional military intelligence became accepted doctrine, and the specialized maps and analysis techniques he pioneered became standard tools for military planners around the world. Today, when we consider the Allied victory in World War II, we often focus on the heroism of combat soldiers, the strategic brilliance of military commanders, and the industrial might that produced the weapons and equipment needed for victory. But we should also remember the quiet geography professor who never carried a rifle, but whose maps and analysis helped ensure that when American forces went into battle, they had every possible advantage that knowledge and preparation could provide. His war was fought not with bullets and bombs, but with pencils and slide rules, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon is simply knowing more about the battlefield than your enemy does.